The First and the Second World Wars are always considered a very terrible time in history, particularly for the number of lives lost. Some would say that the wars changed civilization as we know it, and while that is true, they also cost a lot of lives. It is an unfortunate time in history for everyone involved. Welcome back to the Told You Another Story channel. In this video, we will be looking at the story of a woman named Aloisia Veit. During the First and Second World Wars, there were some people who became quite popular, and not the good kind. One of those people was Adolf Hitler, and till today, his name represents a dark time in history. However, this isn't a story about him. This is a story about someone else. Everyone knows that Adolf Hitler is a bad man, and we have reasons to stick to that notion. He was the dictator ruling Germany between 1933 and 1945 who instigated the Second World War when he invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939. He was also closely involved in many military operations during the war, and was vital to the perpetration of the genocide that cost about 6 million Jews and millions of other victims their lives. However, Adolf Hitler also had family members who suffered from the war, some even from his hand. We will be looking at one of his cousins, Aloisia Veit. Aloisia Veit was born on July 18, 1891, in Pontefell, Austria-Hungary. She was from the Schicklgruber line, and her parental great-grandmother, Josepha Schicklgruber, and Adolf Hitler's parental grandmother, Maria Anna Schicklgruber, were sisters. It is believed that the Schicklgrubers were quite close to Adolf Hitler's family, and that his father helped Aloisia's father get a job as a civil servant in Vienna. During her lifetime, she worked as a chambermaid, that is, until she was admitted into a mental institution. On January 26, 1932, Aloisia was admitted to the Am Steinhof Asylum in Vienna for what was described as conspicuous behavior, and she stayed in closed wards for 9 years. According to her patient file, Aloisia was diagnosed with schizophrenic mental disorder, with helplessness and depression, distractedness, hallucinations, and delusions. According to reports, she told doctors she was haunted by ghosts and the presence of a skull. The question now is, what makes her story so horrific? To answer that, we have to look at the AKTION T4. AKTION T4 was a mass murder campaign where involuntary euthanasia was performed on a number of people in Nazi Germany. The name T4 is an acronym for Tiergartenstrasse 4, a street address of the Chancellery Department introduced in early 1940 in the Berlin borough of Tiergarten, which employed and paid personnel associated with AKTION T4. At the start of the 20th century, the sterilization of anyone carrying what was considered a hereditary defect, and in some cases, people demonstrating what was believed to be hereditary antisocial behavior, was a respectable field of medicine. Countries like the US, Denmark, Canada, and Switzerland passed laws that allowed coerced sterilization. However, studies conducted in the 1920s classified Germany as a country that was oddly reluctant to introduce sterilization legislation. In his book, Mein Kampf, Adolf Hitler wrote that one day racial hygiene will appear as a deed greater than the most victorious wars of our present bourgeois era. The term AKTION T4 is a post-war coining, and contemporary German terms include Euthanasie, which is euthanasia, and Gnadentod, which means merciful death. The T4 program came from the Nazi Party policy of racial hygiene, an idea that the German population needed to be purified of racial enemies, which also included anyone restricted to a mental health facility, and those with simple physical disabilities. This led to the use of new insulin shock treatments by German psychiatrists to figure out if certain patients with schizophrenia were curable. A man named Karl Brandt, who served as the doctor to Adolf Hitler and the head of the Reich Chancellery, Hans Lammers, testified after the war that Adolf Hitler had told them as early as 1933 that he favored the murder of the incurably ill, but recognized that the public wouldn't accept this. In 1935, he also told Gerhard Wagner, the leader of Reich doctors, that the question couldn't be taken up in peacetime, saying such a problem could be more smoothly and easily carried out in war. He wrote that he planned to radically solve the problem of the mental asylums in such an event. AKTION T4 started with a trial case in late 1938, when Adolf Hitler instructed Karl Brandt to assess a petition received from two parents for the mercy killings of their child who was visually impaired and had physical and developmental disabilities. The child, eventually identified as Gerhard Kretschmer, was killed in July 1939, and Adolf Hitler instructed Karl Brandt to proceed in the same manner in all similar cases. 3 weeks after the boy's death, the Reich Committee for the Scientific Registering of Hereditary and Congenital Illnesses was created to register sidekicks or newborns considered as defective. The secret killing of infants started in 1939 and got worse after the war began, which led to the death of 5,000 children by 1941. Adolf Hitler favored murdering those whom he believed to be lebensunwertes Leben, or life unworthy of life. After the invasion of Poland, the head of the state hospital near Munich, Hermann von Müller, said, "It is unbearable to me that the flower of our youth must lose their lives at the front, so that the feeble-minded and asocial element can have a secure existence in the asylum." Hermann von Müller supported killing by gradually reducing food, which he thought was more merciful than poison injections. This program began with children who were born with hydrocephaly, microcephaly, idiocy, and Down syndrome, particularly when associated with deafness and blindness, paralysis, including spastic conditions, and malformations of any kinds, particularly of head, spinal column, and limbs. Within a short time, plans were developed to expand the program of euthanasia to adults. The first adults with disabilities to be murdered en masse by the Nazi regime were Poles, which took place after the invasion of September 1st, 1939. In the Danzig, now Gdansk area, around 7,000 Polish patients from different institutions were murdered, and 10,000 more were killed in the Gdynia area. The first experiment in which patients were gassed was conducted in October 1939 at Fort 7 in Posen, leading to the death of hundreds of prisoners by carbon monoxide poisoning. This took place in an improvised gas chamber built by Albert Widmann, chief chemist of the German criminal police. The idea of murdering adult mental patients later spread from occupied Poland to adjoining areas of Germany, possibly because SS officers in the Nazi Party in these areas were most familiar with the happenings in Poland. These were also the areas where German people wounded in the Polish campaign were expected to be cared for, which created a demand for hospital space. In October, all nursing homes, hospitals, and asylums were obligated to report all patients who had been committed as criminally insane, who had been institutionalized for 5 years or more, who were of non-Aryan race, or who had been diagnosed with a series of conditions. These conditions included Huntington's chorea, paralysis, epilepsy, senile dementia, schizophrenia, advanced syphilis, encephalitis, and terminal neurological conditions generally. Many doctors and administrators thought that the reports were to find inmates who were capable of being recruited for labor service and tended to exaggerate the degree of incapacity of these patients in the hopes of protecting them from labor conscription. When some health institutions refused to cooperate, teams of T4 doctors visited and compiled the lists, occasionally in a disorganized and ideologically motivated manner. In 1940, every Jewish patient was removed from institutions and murdered. The first gassings in Germany took place in January 1940 at the Brandenburg Euthanasia Center. The operation was headed by Victor Brack, who stated, "The needle belongs in the hand of the doctor." Pure bottled carbon monoxide gas was used for this deadly process. Condemned patients were taken from their various institutions to new centers in T4 charitable ambulance buses, known as the Community Patients Transport Service. They were operated by teams of SS men clad in white coats to give them an air of medical care. On November 28, 1940, Aloisia Veit was transported to the Viennese Municipal Sanatorium and nursing home in Ybbs an der Donau, Lower Austria, and from there to the NS Killing Center in Hardheim on December 6, 1940, where she was gassed to death there. Whether Adolf Hitler knew about Aloisia's condition and fate remains unclear. However, the Gestapo had labeled her family line idiotic progeny in a secret 1944 report. It was also believed that many of the Schicklgruber family crashed into suicide and mental illness until eventually the entire line died out. Thank you for watching this video. Hit us up in the comments section and give us a thumbs up if you liked the video. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos.